I'm happy to announce that Center for Studies in Science Policy and STEPS Center, we started this collaboration 2 years back, and it is growing from strength to strength. We started with one project, now we have another project on grassroots, and then another project we have on the anvil is Global Hub for Sustainability. Well, as far as the concept of sustainability is concerned, in the last 2-3 decades, many theoretical perspectives and approaches have converged, and it is becoming more and more acceptable. Though there could be diverse opinions, perspective, and the STEPS and CSSP here, we believe that there is a possibility to evolve a common concept, and with this humble beginning, in future we hope that this gets translated into some international action. Mainly the divergence could be because of the global unequal situation on resources. Not only the unequal resources, but this might lead to unequal benefits, and therefore there could be divergence of opinion about the way social justice that we think should be meted out. So in spite of this divergence, we are trying to evolve a common conceptual framework here, and to a great extent we find that there are possibilities that we come out with some common conceptual framework. So we have a tight schedule, so I don't want to be between you and the speakers, so I would request Professor Sopari to inaugurate the symposium and deliver his inaugural speech.
Professor Melissa Leach, Pranab Desai, Dinesh Aprol, and all faculty members of CSSP, the delegates who have come from Sussex, from abroad, a warm welcome to all of you to this university on my own behalf and also on behalf of the university. Some days back, Professor Pranab Desai and Dinesh Aprol, they came to my office that they would like to organize this meeting, a symposium on exploring pathways to sustainability. The word sustainability itself pushes you into these kinds of meetings because it's an important thing which all of us are talking about. In fact, I, coming from a plant science background, little bit to do on agriculture related issues, and having listened to a person like Swaminathan for many years now, the word sustainability in agriculture he has been talking for a very, very long time. So I thought this would be a right idea to have a symposium on this exploring pathways to sustainability. I would be very interested to learn what finally we derive out of these meetings. Now, in this university, as was mentioned, when we joined, I thought that there is so much of intellectual resources within the university in the field of natural sciences and social sciences, in humanities, that we must all get together and develop certain programs, innovative programs, which should be useful not only from the point of view of research activity, but also the students should benefit out of these common discussions that we are going to hold under this. So we decided to have what we call the JNU Innovation Cluster. This is a cluster where faculty from social sciences, environmental sciences can sit together, not with any specific thing, but just talk together and see whether some new issues can be brought out. And under this cluster program, we have initiated a group on synthetic biology, for example, which has already been funded from outside resources. We have a program on climate change. And there's a climate change in which one of the research proposal, which is on cryosphere and glacier science, is becoming more and more important, has also been funded. And there are many other programs which are now being evolved as and when the faculty sits together and talk to each other. And in fact, Professor Krishnan took a very good active role in this by organizing a lot of seminars under this innovation programs. And when Pranav Desai came to me and he said we should have a sustainability hub under this JNU cluster club, innovation club, I thought this was a very good idea, especially in collaboration with Sussex, if we can establish these innovation clubs. And also, as he mentioned, that you will also have grassroots technologies being discussed under this one. In fact, last year we had, I know many of you might know that Professor Anil Gupta, who is at IIM Ahmedabad, he came and gave a talk on grassroots technologies. A few days back I was talking to him because the President of India, who is also the visitor of this university, has been pushing all the university to start innovation clubs, which will talk about this grassroots technology and how to refine this grassroots technology for the betterment of the poor people, as well as come out with new solutions to old problems. So I would request this center that whether they could host the President's Innovation Club in their center and bring students from different backgrounds, give them problems and see whether they can give you solutions. I think this is a thinking club which the President wants to be hosted in each of the universities. Maybe Professor Pranav Desai, if you can take lead in this one and develop this along with Anil Gupta, we can have this club. Now this is a fact that we have not been totally able to achieve some of the targets which were laid under United Nations Millennium Development Goals 2015. We're only 1 year behind 2015, 2014. But many of the goals which United Nations had put before the global community, we have not been able to fill up those ones except in some minor ways like poverty reduction or fight against diseases, improved conditions for slum dwellers in cities. In some parts of the world, this has been partly been able to achieve. Or even enrollment in the primary education, which was a very important goal which had been achieved. In fact, achieving these goals also lead to other problems simultaneously. I was the other day in Bihar, in Patna, and this is where we had to select certain vice chancellors orders for some universities. But I happened to meet the Minister of Education there. he came and met us. So he was saying that he was in one of the meeting in US and he was giving a talk on primary education. And he told, this was in Texas somewhere, and he said that there are 20 million children who are going through primary education in Bihar. The chairman of that session was from an American university. He said, Mr. Minister, I would like you to check up your numbers. Is it 20 million or it's less? He said, I'm sure with my numbers, this is 20 million. So they are pushing through primary education 20 million children who will come out in a few years' time and would be ready to go to the secondary and higher education. The problem is, do we have enough institutions at secondary level or at a higher level to accommodate these children who have aspirations to go into education, higher education? So although you are pushing into primary education, which one target you may seem to be fulfilling, you have created another level of issues that we don't have enough educational institutions to bring them into secondary education. So you were saying, now we need another solution. What do we do? How many new colleges and universities should we bring up? In fact, he offered a land to us. He said, can JNU bring up a campus in Bihar? So I said, we'll look into it. In fact, he sent me a letter already. I mean, this minister I've seen for the first time, a minister who is so fast. By the time I reached back here, the letter was on my table offering land to Jawaharlal University to start a higher education system in that country. So what I'm trying to say that while we meet certain objectives, the targets, we might be creating some other problems for ourselves, and therefore the sustainability, even if you talk about in education, we'll have to look into all the parameters simultaneously. So there are a lot of challenges before us in sustainable development. This is you have to have a sustainable development when it comes to eradicating extreme poverty, hunger and malnutrition, income inequality, urban development, energy needs, consumption and production, and managing our Earth's natural resources. That's the major thing, how to manage our natural resources in a sustainable way. So the challenges are enormous, and therefore the solutions will have to come from gatherings like this or collaborative works in the global scenario. I'll give you a few numbers here quickly. Now see the kind of challenges which we are talking about, because development and environment are somewhere interdependent, or you have to look into both these things simultaneously. The statistics of this is something like this, which I was just reading recently. Every year, about 15.2 million hectares of forest land in tropical countries are cut down in the name of development. So many trees are being cut because you need this land either for urbanization or for agriculture purposes. Nearly 2 billion people are facing problems of finding enough water, and it is mentioned that by 2025, it's estimated that 2.5 billion, which is roughly like half of the population, could face water shortages. Unsafe water kills 3 million people each year, mostly children in developing countries, and especially in Africa they have found this problem to be of acute nature. Land degradation, if you look at, there's growing competition for water from industry and also municipality now, because the population increase and urbanization is increasing. There's a lot more demand on water from industry and municipality, and therefore the water which is required for agriculture purposes, currently about 60 to 70% water is used for agriculture purposes. So even the distribution of water, the sustainability of water distribution will have to be looked into how to really achieve this. So we'll have to find scientific and technological solutions to this, to have agriculture which will depend upon less water, so more Biotechnological other approaches will have to be brought into your sustainability model so that you can reduce water for agriculture purposes and it has to be made available for other uses. Pollution, because of development which comes up, maybe air pollution and others, it damages crops, forests, rivers, lakes, and also, as we read more and more, also destroys the marine life across. And that is also where, when we talk about sustainability of marine ecosystems, the land ecosystems, and it will have to be looked into broader sense. And climate change, over and above, the climate change, the melting of glaciers, these are other issues which we are all aware of and need to find solutions. In fact, climate change has been, during our own lifetime, we have seen this change. I belong to Srinagar. That used to be, they call the paradise on earth, enough water, nice climate, and during our early childhood when we were growing, we used to drink water from the taps. There was no problem. There was enough water for everyone. Beautiful climate. There was no pollution ever to be seen there. But today, if you visit that valley, I think you'll have to carry a bottle of water with you. It's a place which has so many lakes, so many rivers. There are snow, there are glaciers, but yet the development has been so skewed because of many reasons, non-planned growth, that your environment has got affected. So human activity, which is required for development, if it is not properly planned, it will have negative impact on environment. So development, environment, economics is something, these three issues which we need to really look at when we talk about exploring pathways to sustainability. So I'm sure that most of you who are experts here will discuss these issues. These are a lot of issues with respect to governance models which we have to think about. The governments have to be involved, NGOs, different agencies, and we'll have to strengthen institutions where we'll be able to look at sustainable models. Sustainable models which will leave this planet for our future generations, where they can live happily. So I'm sure that the experts here will discuss these issues, and I look forward to seeing the outcome of this symposium. And I'm very happy that this is a right step that you have taken to collaborate with STEPS. And I'm happy that this collaboration will move forward in the years to come. Thank you very much for having me.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Melissa Leach, and I'm the director currently of the STEPS Centre, and also about to become the director of IDS, where the STEPS Centre has been based, connected with our partners in SPRU and the university, and many others around the world. And I'd like to start by saying how absolutely delighted we all are to be here and to be having this opportunity to strengthen the collaborations with colleagues at JNU and with CSSP that have already been proceeding in really exciting ways over the last few years. And I see this symposium very much jointly convened as an opportunity to take forward those collaborations, explore ideas together, and as Pranav Desai and Professor Sapuri have outlined, to build a stronger set of collaborations going forward into the future. So what I'd like to do in the next half an hour or so is just offer some introductory thoughts, really, which I hope can help to kick off this symposium and introduce some of what I hope we'll be talking about over the next couple of days. So the context for this, as Professor Sapori has already outlined, are the very profound challenges of sustainability that I think we're facing in a world which is also highly unequal, globally, nationally, and indeed locally. So we're looking today at environmental change, often of increasingly rapid sorts, whether we're talking about climate, biodiversity, changes in natural resources, and it's dynamics that are really very complex and involve threats and thresholds of all kinds across many scales. We're also in a context where there's growing scientific interest, public interest, policy interest in doing something about these problems, and yet in ways that are often bringing about trade-offs and tensions between dominant patterns of development and industrialization, and the ways that sustainability might be addressed. And the impacts of many of these challenges are often very profound, affecting human well-being in some very difficult ways, in contexts which, socially and economically, are also very dynamic, involving all kinds of instabilities, shifting geographies of power, of privilege, of development, and at the same time as some of our questions around poverty and injustice are being addressed, and Professor Sapori talked a little bit about education as being one area where perhaps we're looking at reductions in poverty and opportunities in some respects. We've got others which are unfolding in dynamic and often unpredictable ways. So amidst all of this, questions of poverty, questions of injustice must remain absolutely centre stage. So this is really the context in which, in the STEPS Centre and with our Indian partners, over the last few years, we've been asking a core question, which is not a small question, it's a very big one. We've been asking how we might think about building pathways to sustainability, and I'll be talking in a moment about what we mean by that connect opportunities in technology and science and environmental integrity with social justice. How might we conceptualize these pathways? How might we move from theory to action in building them in a world that is complex and dynamic and highly unequal? So, if that's the fundamental challenge, it's also one that we're tackling amidst what I think is a new sense of urgency that we're seeing in the global context, at least as voiced by many scientific and policy communities. So, as this slide indicates, we've got a whole range of new concepts and arguments emerging on the global stage that I think we need to address quite seriously and think about. So we've got many scientists claiming that we've entered a new epoch, a new geological epoch, many people are saying, the Anthropocene, where human drivers in production, in consumption, which have accelerated massively, especially since the 1950s, we now have to take more seriously than ever as a major force in driving Earth system processes. We've got new frameworks globally which are emerging with enormous authority, actually, to try and deal with these challenges, suggesting, including, for example, the notion of planetary boundaries, the suggestion that humanity is rapidly approaching and in many cases has also transgressed a set of key thresholds in Earth system processes, around questions of pollution, of biodiversity, of climate change, and this rapidly re-steer development to stay within what's being called a safe operating space for humanity, if we're not to enter what's being talked about as a zone of far greater ecological turbulence, which will have very profound consequences for future development. And I think we're increasingly seeing the idea of kind of crisis narratives, the potential catastrophes that are set to unfold as climate change, as food crises, as financial crises, as natural resource degradation come together in what some are talking about as powerful nexuses of crisis set to affect human well-being. But then we're also seeing new global narratives about optimism. One is around the idea of green growth and green economies. If we can only gear technologies and economies to work together, the argument that there are powerful win-wins to be had, which can build futures in far more sustainable ways. And all of this was discussed, as we know, in 2012 at the Rio +20 conference. And these ideas are very much live as the world moves in this intergovernmental process being convened by the UN to agree a set of sustainable development goals in a post-2015 era. And indeed, just in Delhi over the last few days, there's been a major intergovernmental meeting to talk about this new era. Okay, this is all fine, but what I think we're also seeing, and what we're very concerned with within the STEPS Centre and with our collaborators, is beginning actually to question some of these narratives of both crisis and overarching opportunity. And I think we need to start looking much harder at some of these powerful global concepts. Okay, planetary boundaries, but who's setting those boundaries? Are they scientific? Are they objective? Are we to look to scientific authority to define where climatic limits and natural resource limits might be? Or should we also be interested in human meanings and in how different groups around the world might be thinking about what a safe operating space, or indeed a good Anthropocene, a good operating space for humanity into the future might be? I think we need to question some of these very optimistic narratives about green growth and green economies. What is green? Whose versions are we to look to? There are some very dominant ones that see the future lying in just getting powerful economies and techno-science together. But what are these views saying in relation to perhaps others that might put social priorities and livelihood priorities first? Whose notions of green count? How do we look at these together? The Anthropocene, this increasingly powerful concept, is this something that should and can only be defined at the global level around notions of planetary needs and an Earth system? How do these ideas relate perhaps to more diverse national and local settings and dynamics and ideas of priority? These crisis narratives around the nexus of climate, of food, of natural resources, these may serve to draw attention to the urgency of challenge, but actually what do they obscure? Are there other narratives about change which might need a little bit more weight? And if we're to look to these ideas that were very powerfully articulated around Rio +20 and are being talked about now, the notion of the future we want. The future, but who are we? Whose futures are we talking about? And ultimately, I think for us in the STEPS Centre and some of the work we've been doing, we need to think about questions of justice far more centrally in terms of these debates, and to subject them to politics. There is a quite heated politics unfolding around sustainability at multiple levels, but some of this is going on in quite hidden ways. Some of it's not being voiced within these global discussions, which are often quite technocentrically driven. So some of these politics are emerging in more subtle forms of resistance. How do we take forward these politics in rather more substantial ways? And what are the roles of research in these processes? Now, I think here there are also some big global opportunities. I recently became co-chair of Future Earth, which is the big international initiative launched at Rio +20 to try and bring together scientific and user communities internationally to launch a new program of interdisciplinary and engaged research to try and set humanity on some new paths towards more sustainable futures. And if you can see this, the diagram here on the left, which looks at the conceptual framework for Future Earth, it has the notion of pathways to sustainability at its core. The notion of research which is around thinking about and building transformations and solutions. And doing that in a cross-scale way, and really trying to think about bringing the diverse natural sciences together with social scientists and with user engagement far more centrally. And so I think there is a growing commitment at many levels to doing science differently in ways which can actually garner a diversity of perspectives towards building transformative change. But the question that needs to be asked in this context, and the question I think we're grappling with others, is amidst those sort of global and often quite vague aspirations, what kinds of concepts, frameworks, ideas can really help to move us forwards? And I think that's the challenge for this symposium. So this is also where the STEPS Centre over the last few years, with our partners, has been trying to grapple and to develop some conceptual offerings. And our kind of core offering to date is what we're calling a pathways approach. This is really best, I think, described as a kind of approach to thinking and action, a kind of, not a tight analytical framework as such, but a broader way of thinking, of guiding the ways we might go about some of these challenges of integrated interdisciplinary research. And a way of thinking about sustainability challenges in ways that also incorporate concerns with social justice quite centrally. It's been very much developed so far since the STEPS Centre began in 2006 in interaction with our partners, including very much our partners in India. But as we move to strengthen our collaborations, particularly with our Indian partners at JNU and others in Delhi, the ideas that we've developed together so far will surely be enriched further and changed. And a core aim of this symposium is to build on that contestation and process of enrichment that we've had so far and take it forward into the future. So what I want to do now is just indicate to you some of, I suppose, the building blocks and ideas that have been there in the pathways approach so far, as a kind of offering that we might debate and think about further in the next couple of days. So a central kind of building block has been sustainability, but an attempt to kind of recapture and recast the way we think about it. Now, sustainability, as Professor Sapuri and Pranab Desai have also outlined, is a term with a history, and it's been a pretty contested history. If we think about sustainability as an attempt to link questions of environment to mainstream issues of economy and development, we've had a lot of definitions over the decades, including the Brundtland definition around sustainable development and linking the needs of the present with those of future generations, but also a great deal of debate, which I think came to a head in many ways around just over 20 years ago now, around Rio in 1992, where we saw those more technical ideas about sustainability co-constructed with a lot of different visions of how sustainability might be achieved. But I think over the intervening kind of 20 plus years, we've also seen a lot of discrediting of that term of sustainability, as people have said, well, actually, it's often rhetoric, which proves quite empty. Has sustainability really proved up to the task of guiding what governments and policymakers might be doing? We've had it often become a set of rather managerial planning approaches, which have not been up to the task of bringing about real change. And I think that's partly why in the last few years, under Rio 2012, we've seen other terms, including green economy and green growth, being seen as rather more appealing and rather more positive, as a way of, as something that powerful politicians and business interests can latch onto. But I think what we've been saying really in the STEPS Centre over the last few years is that sustainability, in contrast with some of these other terms like green economy, actually has something really rather important about it, around that sense of integrating the environmental with the social as well as the economic. But in order to use it, we can recapture it, but we also need to recast it and see it as a politicized and normative term. So what do I mean by that? If we're going to recapture sustainability, we need to move beyond both the kind of broadest term of sustainability, look it up in a dictionary, and it's really just about maintaining something, maintaining a system. But that's actually too conservative. and it can be about maintaining any sort of system, and it might be a system that we actually don't want at all. But I think we also need to move beyond these rather static normative kind of views that we saw in Brundtland, which is about linking some notion of needs with environmental limits, or the terms we're seeing now in the planetary boundaries debate, where sustainability is about human well-being in a safe operating space, or indeed the terms that we saw at Rio Plus 20, which is a rather generic notion of sustainable development goals. What we're suggesting is that we need to get much more specific and much more directly normative, and therefore political, to think harder about what qualities of well-being, of equity and of environmental integrity we're talking about as they relate to particular dynamic environments and particular notions of justice and injustice. Sustainability perhaps needs to be recast as the specific ideas of well-being, social equity, environmental integrity as defined by and for particular people, contexts and settings. And that means that around any issue we're going to have multiple versions, contested sustainabilities, which need to be looked at, defined and then deliberated amongst for particular issues and groups. For instance, one that's going to come up quite shortly in one of our project sessions might look at waste management. If we're thinking about waste and sustainable ways of thinking about waste, are we talking about those at the level of a city and the priorities perhaps of the urban elites? Or are we thinking about waste picker livelihoods? Or if we're thinking about climate change, are we thinking about sustainability in relation to global targets, or also about more human and national questions of meaning around the uncertainties that people are living with? Whatever the context, I think in the next couple of days we're going to be recasting sustainability as almost a kind of boundary term, a discursive resource which we should be using to generate and then facilitate arguments, and then arguments and action about quite diverse pathways to different futures, and to think harder about how we might deliberate amongst those. So this is where the notion of pathways comes into play, and the ways we've been thinking about it as something that has to be about politics and about the politics of knowledge. And so here we recognise we've been using a kind of heuristic, almost a kind of conceptual set of sort of guiding points, which would recognise that the world is always endlessly complex, it's dynamic, we can't know about or pin down everything within it. And so it's useful for the purposes of any particular problem to think about it in terms of systems. A system, one can imagine, as something that involves the interaction of the ecological, of the social, of the technological. It's always going to be dynamic. And it doesn't involve everything. A system is almost a kind of way of picking out the things that we're interested in and looking at them so we can get a grip on a particular problem area. But who is we here? Now, the particular kind of move, I think, in the STEPS Centre work that we've taken is to say that there's no one way of identifying a system. Rather, the way you frame a system depends on who you are. And that's going to vary depending on whether we're thinking about groups of local people, perhaps particular government groups, perhaps particular academics with their different disciplines, or particular business interests. How you frame a system, what dynamics are of interest, what goals for system change one has in mind, and where that system is going, is open to quite contending perspectives, goals, values, and we need to take those quite seriously. Those different framings in any particular problem area are going to lead to different narratives or storylines being told about a problem. We talk about narratives quite often in the STEPS Centre, as our partners do, and I think you'll hear this in the project presentations that we have. A narrative is really a simple story about a problem, with often a beginning defining what the issue is, middles laying out its consequences, a notion often of who is to blame for a problem, but also who might act or change their behaviour to respond to it. And the end of the story might be a particular future, a desired future, or a way perhaps of averting a catastrophe, or enhancing a particular version of sustainability. Some narratives become part of pathways. They come to justify actual patterns of intervention and of change. Choices about technologies, about policies, and about action, which have a sort of role in the world and can actually change things in particular directions. That's what we mean by a pathway. A pathway can be defined quite simply as the particular directions in which a given system changes over time. But there's no one direction. There may be a direction that's operating, but we also have to pay attention to the alternatives which might be suppressed, but perhaps actually might need to be given a little bit more voice and opportunity. Because too often, I think, we see the narratives of powerful actors and of institutions, whether they're within science and technology, whether they're in business, whether they're in government, becoming, to use the pathways metaphor, the kind of motorways which channel and drive governance and interventions and choices, overrunning other, perhaps valuable pathways, which, including those that may respond to the goals and perspectives of people who are currently marginalised. So what we've been trying to do in the pathways approach is to pay attention to these multiple pathways, and backed by methods and by particular approaches to governance, helping to open up space for a more plural appreciation of dynamic alternatives and of sustainabilities, and to open up this process of building pathways which might be currently hidden or suppressed. Now, I think we're going to see lots of examples of different ways projects have gone about that in the sessions that follow. But just one at the broader level of the centre, a number of our projects have been looking at. Just take the example of alternative pathways to something that's globally talked about a great deal, the idea of sustainable food futures amidst the challenges of global population growth, of climate change, of biodiversity loss, of land use change, and so on. And of course, one can imagine a vast array of alternative possibilities for meeting these challenges, which connect up technologies and science with governance and with people in very different ways, ranging perhaps from those that focus on transgenics and crop development, through to other kinds of industrial hybrid plant breeding, through to those that would start from small-scale farmer livelihoods, incorporate participatory plant breeding, or a variety of technological and governance approaches to think about climate-smart agriculture, biochar being one that I've been working with in recent times. And the point in terms of pathways, that each of these, thought of as a pathway, involves different combinations of technologies, of policies, of actors, of interests and values. And they imply different possible winners and losers, opportunities and risks. Some of them are compatible in any given setting and could be pursued together, but others involve potential tensions and trade-offs. But what we also see in many settings is that power relations, and sometimes the contingent interactions of technologies and business interests and people, often close down those choices. So we don't see that whole array out there as if it was a kind of level playing field. What we actually see is the lock-in around some particular pathways, while others don't get much of a look-in. They become marginalised. So we've been arguing quite strongly for the need to open up those processes so that we can recognise a greater variety of possible pathways. And we've been experimenting and working with partners in a range of different modes of opening up. Some of them have been about thinking around governance approaches. What kinds of institutional arrangements and alliances might work, what approaches to to deliberation and deliberative governance, or reflexive governance, which actually encourages the actors involved to think harder and perhaps question their own priorities and approaches. We've been working in a number of our projects around what we've often called designs. What roles are there for new appraisal tools and methods? And we've been also very much with partners in different settings, trying to connect research up with forms of political engagement, whether it's around approaches to influencing policy processes and trying to affect policy change in different ways, whether it's been around networks and alliance building, perhaps with social movements and citizens, or indeed something that I would see as a form of political engagement, how we interact with flows of knowledge, of information and communication, using some of the tools of social media and other media to try and connect knowledge and policy. And across all of this work, I think we've had to ask ourselves as researchers about our own positions and to try and draw our own priorities in quite a questioning way into the kinds of work that we do. So how have we done this? I thought it might be useful just to give a quick outline of the sort of structure that we've worked with in the STEPS Centre, almost by way of introduction, so that you can see how some of the projects that we'll be talking about over the next couple of days have fitted in to this landscape. So the STEPS Centre in Sussex has so far been structured around what we've called domains. These are sort of the sectoral interests that we've had, which have included food and agriculture, a lot of work on health and disease, a lot of work on water and sanitation, and a lot of work on climate and energy. But cross-cutting all of those have been these themes around understanding the dynamics of change, thinking about designs, appraisal tools and methods, and thinking about governance and institutions. And our projects, including those that you'll be hearing about, have all, in different ways, cross-cut all of those things. So our projects have been about bringing these different sectors together, but also thinking about the interactions of governance, dynamics, and designs. We've been working particularly with our impact communications and engagement unit across the projects about thinking around impact and influence. And we have a cross-cutting work stream on methods and methodologies, which has been working with the projects to try and understand better how we might open up and appreciate these alternative pathways. So that's the kind of architecture of the STEPS Centre in Sussex, and the architecture through which we've been engaging with our partners in India and elsewhere. And these projects, very much collaborative projects developed with partners, have been very varied. They've been working in different settings around the world, around a variety of different issues. Just this little picture just shows those that we were focusing on very much in the first phase of the Centre's work from 2006 to 2011, including two very strong important projects in the Indian context, one around peri-urban sustainability and another around sort of risk and uncertainty in technology. And people who are here in this room were involved in both of those. But then in our current phase, sort of since 2011, we've had these little projects in blue, and those which have a red ring around them are all projects that have involved Indian and South Asian partners. And these are the ones that we're going to be focusing on over the next couple of days. Around securitisation, around environmental health in transitional spaces, around uncertainty from above and below, and around grassroots innovation, which has been mentioned. And I think all of these provide very valuable sort of Foucaultian lenses for exploring and building pathways to sustainability. And this is really just what I wanted to flag in these last few minutes. I think across these projects, we've actually got a fantastic set for linking very local and national concerns up to these big global challenges. So, the first one we'll be looking at is around these pathways to environmental health in urban contexts. So this is a project that really gets to grips with these huge sustainability challenges associated with incredibly rapid urbanisation, which we're seeing as a process around the world and very much happening in India and elsewhere and in Delhi, giving rise to, I think, a whole set of new and really dynamic urban and peri-urban spaces, which pose enormous sustainability challenges. We're seeing in those contexts, and as we'll see in this project, a variety of different possible pathways for addressing core issues, such as the challenges involved with dealing with waste and the waste produced by these growing populations. Different pathways imply very different environmental and health risks and opportunities. They have very different implications for different groups of people, poorer people, wealthier people. So what I think we're going to see in this project in the next session after the tea break is a very live and active politics of pathways unfolding on something we need to understand and address, working across researchers and groups uniting activists and policymakers in very different ways. So urbanisation, waste, and the context that's unfolding in. The project that we're going to look at around uncertainty from below, I think, is a way into addressing, again, massive challenges associated with climate change. But a particular way of thinking about those, I think everybody acknowledges that as soon as one's talking about climate, one's also talking about uncertainty. Uncertainty about the ways climate systems are unfolding and the impacts that they will have at different scales and in different settings. And climate and uncertainty is really the core focus and context for this project. But what the project is doing is to say, okay, how are these uncertainties understood and what does that mean about pathways of change? Very often in climate change debates, we've seen the perspectives of scientists, earth system and climate scientists and modelers dominating and driving particular pathways of response, whether those have been around governance and attempting to meet climate targets, whether they've been around technologies. But what this project has been doing is trying to uncover uncertainties from below, particularly from the perspectives of people who are living on a daily basis with climate-related uncertainties in all their complexity in rural and urban settings in India. And asking very seriously what alternative pathways are suggested if we think about uncertainty differently from below. The third project we'll home in on is around grassroots innovation, which really addresses, again, this much bigger question, this enormous challenge and opportunity, which says technologies and innovation have critical roles in meeting sustainability challenges. And I mean, this is the mantra of the green growth and green economy debate. And yet, I think many people recognise some of the problems of mainstream approaches to innovation, the ways they sometimes exclude, the ways they follow particular pathways but close out others. And what this project is asking, again closely in interaction with colleagues in CSSP and elsewhere, is whether grassroots innovation and more inclusive approaches offer better prospects. And I think the question of better is something that we'll be posing, especially for people marginalised by mainstream growth. And this, of course, builds on really important long-standing debates in the Indian context. Here we see Anil Gupta, who's already been mentioned here, as a pioneer of grassroots innovation through the Honeybee Network and elsewhere, and has been a part of our thinking here in this project, particularly around the opportunities as well as challenges for some of the innovations from the margins to inform pathways to sustainability and justice, and to think about how those might gain more power in a field that's also live and contested. And then finally, we'll be thinking about a project on securitisation, which again hits a really big global issue. And this is the thinking about the nexus, as I mentioned earlier, the ways in which climate and water and food and energy challenges are being talked about as coming together to impose often the narratives are around catastrophe and crisis, but certainly major concerns about how these things are playing out. And this project is also thinking about how that nexus thinking interacts with questions around security and the ways that new discourses and actors are coming to identify with nexus thinking. Asking what new narratives and pathways are emerging and who might be gaining and losing from them, and what alternatives are there. And water, and particularly the challenges around storing water, are in this project, I think, providing a very powerful lens for identifying and questioning pathways, trying to look at how those might be, those associated with everything from large-scale hydropower developments and the revitalisation of debates and arguments for large dams are emerging, as compared with a range of pathways emerging from more community-level perspectives and priorities. Okay, I mean, that's a very brief taster of some of the ways that these projects, I think, connect to these bigger ideas around pathways and these bigger global concerns. And I think, as we'll also see in the projects, each of them is involving researchers from a variety of different disciplines, interacting with people who are involved as practitioners, as activists, as policymakers. And this is, I think, some of the key to what we've been trying to do within the STEPS Centre, to try and ground and really generate an integrative approach to doing research and to engaging it with action amongst those positioned to act and take things forward in quite practical ways. So finally then, I would just like to kind of conclude this introductory session by saying, in a way, a kind of aspiration for this symposium, that we can use these projects and these case studies to think harder about some bigger questions, about the connections between theory and practice. And the way the symposium has been structured is to enable us to get into some of these projects and cases, but also to enable us to sort of step above those and think across them around broader insights. So I hope that we'll have a set of really interactive discussions and debates in the project sessions, and that people will think about the ideas they're generating and bring those into the session that we'll be having in a cross-cutting way around theory and practice, which we've organised and our colleagues have organised in quite an interactive way in a sort of World Cafe format. And then the final panel session that we'll be having tomorrow. So what implications can we draw from these projects and interactions around our concepts, around how people work in an interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary way, beyond those kind of aspirations that we're seeing in Future Earth and elsewhere, towards actually grounding these concepts, making them real, making them work for people and in real settings. So we're thinking, I think, in this symposium about connecting understanding and concepts with action. We're trying to move towards approaches and methods which will, yes, explore pathways to sustainability, but maybe also move beyond them to think about how we might build them so they act in real ways in the world. And then ultimately, I think I would see the core aim of this symposium as about building collaboration. These are huge challenges. They're going to need the best brains and also the best practices and experiences out there. And how can we in the STEPS Centre and in JNU and CSSP and our other partners in Delhi and beyond combine our experiences, our diverse areas of wisdom more effectively towards perhaps building more sustainable and just futures in the South Asian context and beyond. And I've got massive hopes for this emerging collaboration, the idea of a global STEPS consortium with hubs in different parts of the world. And this symposium is really the first step in strengthening collaborations towards building a hub and ultimately building something more global. So I'm delighted to be here, I'm delighted that this is happening, and I hope we can have a really rich but also inclusive and honest set of discussions over the next couple of days, which really set the stage for working together more effectively into the future. Thank you.